You spent good money on an NVIDIA, AMD, or Intel GPU. You took the time to download the latest driver straight from the manufacturer's website. You installed it, rebooted, and everything ran beautifully. Then Windows Update ran quietly in the background, and without asking you, without warning you, without a single notification, it replaced your brand new driver with one that's 2 years old. Microsoft knew it. This has been happening since Windows 11 launched in 2021. The community documented it for years, and Microsoft stayed silent until May 2026, when they finally admitted it publicly and announced a fix that won't fully roll out until early 2027. When you buy a laptop or a pre-built PC, your manufacturer submits a customized GPU driver to the Windows Update catalog. Microsoft approves it. That OEM driver gets validated and stamped as the correct driver for your hardware. Fine. That part makes sense. The problem is, what happens next? GPU vendors like NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel release new drivers constantly. Game-ready drivers, studio drivers, hot fixes, performance updates. NVIDIA alone can push multiple releases in a single month. These carry real improvements, better frame rates, new game optimizations, bug fixes, support for newer display technologies. When you go to NVIDIA's website and download the latest driver directly, you're getting cutting-edge software that your GPU was designed to run. But Windows Update doesn't see it that way. Windows uses a 4-part hardware ID system, a broad code that identifies your GPU's manufacturer and general hardware class. When Windows Update finds a driver in its catalog that matches that hardware ID, it ranks it as the top priority match for your device, regardless of whether it's newer or older than what you've already installed. So the moment Windows Update runs and finds the OEM-approved driver in the catalog, it pushes it to your machine, completely ignoring the version number and date of the driver you chose. Microsoft's own documentation confirms this. The system establishes a highest-ranked driver on Windows Update, including devices where the customer installed a preferred driver version of their choice. Windows latest confirmed in May 2026, testing that Windows Update was replacing April 2026 drivers with versions from 2024 or even earlier. A system administrator described installing NVIDIA driver 5.85 in the morning and finding Windows Update had silently rolled it back to an older OEM version by the afternoon. Another user described AMD's Adrenalin control panel completely breaking after Windows replaced their manually installed AMD driver with an older OEM package, the Adrenalin software, which manages GPU settings, game profiles, and recording features, stopped functioning entirely. This is the by-design behavior of Windows Update's driver ranking system, running on every affected Windows 11 machine since 2021, silently and without disclosure. In October 2025, NVIDIA confirmed that a Windows 11 update had caused performance degradation across multiple GPU configurations. The benchmark numbers were stark. One test of Assassin's Creed Shadows showed an average of 149.7 frames per second before the issue and 202.3 frames per second after NVIDIA released an emergency hotfix, a roughly 35% performance gap from a driver change Windows 11 made without user consent. NVIDIA had to rush out that hotfix just to restore performance that users should never have lost in the first place. In January 2026, it escalated further. Microsoft's Patch Tuesday update, KB5074-109, was blamed for slowing NVIDIA graphics cards across multiple titles. Reports cited performance losses of 15 to 20 frames per second, plus flickering shadow rendering artifacts, frame generation errors, and graphical glitches across games and professional applications. Professional users running Quadro cards reported silent system deadlocks during OpenGL workloads, failures that only resolved after completely uninstalling the Windows Update. These crashes were workload dependent, concentrated on modern titles with heavy draw call patterns and professional apps with large OpenGL contexts. Beyond these specific incidents, the broader impact of driver downgrades compounds quietly over time. When Windows Update rolls back your GPU driver to an OEM version that's potentially years behind, you lose every improvement that shipped between then and now. Game-specific optimizations, AI upscaling enhancements, frame generation improvements, support for newer display technologies, bug fixes that took engineers months to develop, all stripped out and replaced with a snapshot in time that your PC manufacturer submitted to Microsoft's catalog and never updated. For gamers, this means measurably lower frame rates, stuttering, and compatibility failures in newer titles. For content creators using GPU-accelerated rendering or video encoding, it means slower exports and application instability. For professionals running compute workloads, it can mean the silent deadlocks described above, failures that are almost impossible to diagnose because, from your perspective, nothing has changed. You didn't touch anything. Windows did it for you. Users have been filing detailed, reproducible reports about driver downgrades since Windows 11 launched in 2021. A single Feedback Hub post requesting that Microsoft make GPU drivers optional updates accumulated over 20,000 upvotes, one of the largest community responses in the Feedback Hub's history. Separate community threads gathered thousands more. The problem was never obscure. It was never ambiguous. It was consistently documented, consistently reproducible, and consistently ignored. What Microsoft never did at any point during those 5 years was proactively inform users that this was happening. There was no pop-up, no notification, no release note buried in a support article explaining that Windows Update might silently replace a manually installed driver with an older OEM version. Users had to discover it themselves, usually by noticing that their GPU control panel had stopped working, or that a game they'd been running smoothly was suddenly stuttering. Then they had to connect the dots back to a Windows update that ran days or weeks earlier. Microsoft's response, when it came at all, was that the behavior was by design, the product of how Windows Update's driver ranking logic was built. And that logic does have a coherent original rationale. The assumption was that a driver validated by your PC manufacturer is safer for your specific hardware than a generic release from the GPU vendor. If you're running a Dell laptop with a specific thermal design and power management profile, the thinking goes, an OEM-certified driver might be more stable for your exact configuration than a general NVIDIA release. That assumption was defensible when GPU drivers were simple compatibility patches. It collapsed completely as GPU software evolved into something far more complex. Modern GPU drivers are full software platforms. NVIDIA's package includes DLSS frame generation logic, display pipeline management, media encoding engines, game-specific shader caches, and AI inference support. While AMD's Adrenalin ecosystem is equally layered. Intel's Arc driver platform is evolving rapidly with frequent releases. When a Dell laptop ships with a GPU driver that was current in mid-2024, and Windows Update keeps re-pushing that driver in 2026, the user loses 18 months of development across all of those features. The OEM has no incentive to keep its catalog submission current. Microsoft has no mechanism to verify whether what's in the catalog is actually newer than what the user has installed. And the user sees nothing. It all happens in the background, after a reboot, without a word. That gap between how the system was designed and how GPU software actually works in 2026 is the entire story. Microsoft chose not to bridge it or even acknowledge it for 5 years. On May 12, 2026, Microsoft published a tech community blog post and updated its driver servicing documentation. The company stated, "We have heard feedback that Windows Update occasionally installs an older OEM-targeted graphics driver over a manually installed general release from the GPU silicon vendor. Occasionally, after 20,000 Feedback Hub upvotes and 5 years of documented complaints. But let's move past the word choice and look at what's actually changing. The fix centers on a new driver targeting model. Instead of the broad 4-part hardware ID system, Microsoft is moving to a 2-part hardware ID combined with what they call computer hardware IDs, or CHIDs. A CHID is far more specific. It identifies not just the general GPU class, but the exact PC model and hardware configuration. This means a driver submitted by Dell for a specific XPS laptop model gets targeted precisely to that device, rather than being pushed to every machine sharing a loosely similar GPU hardware class. In theory, this stops the core problem, a generic OEM driver intended for one specific laptop configuration being ranked as the highest priority driver for hundreds of thousands of different machines. The rollout timeline is as follows. A pilot program ran from April 2026 through September 2026, testing the new targeting system with new driver submissions via Windows Insider release preview builds. Broader enforcement is planned for Q4 2026 through Q1 2027, landing in the February 2027 cumulative update as the default behavior for new driver installations. But here is what Microsoft is not saying loudly enough. This fix is not retroactive. It applies only to new display driver submissions targeting new devices. Existing drivers already sitting in the Windows Update catalog, the ones that have been quietly downgrading systems since 2021, can still behave exactly as they always have. Your existing laptop, your mid-cycle desktop, your gaming build from last year, still potentially exposed during the entire pilot period and beyond, depending on what's in the catalog for your specific hardware. There is also a scope limitation worth flagging. The new targeting policy currently covers GPU drivers only. Other hardware, wireless adapters, Bluetooth chips, chipset drivers, remains outside the fix entirely, even though the same broad targeting logic affects those categories too. The fix is the right engineering direction, and it is genuinely better than what exists today. But it is partial, its timeline is slow, and existing hardware owners are left managing their own exposure for the better part of another year. Since full protection isn't arriving until early 2027, here's how to defend your GPU driver today. Option 1, Group Policy. Windows 11 Pro, Enterprise, or Education only. Press Windows key plus R, type gpedit.msc, and open the local group policy editor. Navigate to Computer Configuration, Arrow, Administrative Templates, Arrow Windows Components, Arrow Windows Update, Arrow, Manage Updates, offered from Windows Update. Enable the policy called Do Not Include Drivers with Windows Updates. This stops Windows Update from delivering any driver packages through the update system. The trade-off, it blocks all driver updates via Windows Update, not just the problematic GPU ones. And this is important, some users report this policy being overridden silently during major Windows feature upgrades. So always check your driver version after any significant Windows update and be prepared to re-enable the policy if needed. Option 2, Registry Edit, all editions including Windows 11 Home. More technical, so back up your system first. You need to set a DWO-RD value called Exclude WU Drivers. In Quality Update to 1 in the Windows Update Policy Registry path. Pure Infotech and the 11 Forum both have detailed, accurate walkthroughs of this exact process. Apply the same discipline as Option 1, verify the registry setting is still in place after any major Windows feature update, because the driver store rebuild that happens during a version upgrade can reset things you thought were locked down. Option 3, Microsoft's Show or Hide Updates tool. Sometimes called Whoosh Hide, this tool lets you hide specific update packages, including specific driver versions, from being installed. It's more surgical than group policy. You block only the problematic OEM driver while every other update continues normally. The downside is that it can stop working after major Windows updates and requires periodic attention to stay effective. Option 4, Manual Monitoring after every update. The most accessible option for everyone regardless of Windows Edition. After every Windows update, open your GPU's control panel, NVIDIA Control Panel, AMD Adrenalin, or Intel Graphics Command Center, and compare the installed driver version against the latest available on the manufacturer's website. If the versions don't match, you've been downgraded. Download the current driver directly from NVIDIA, AMD, or Intel and reinstall it. Keep that installer file saved locally so the recovery takes minutes rather than a full re-download. None of these options should be necessary. But until the February 2027 cumulative update lands and the new targeting system is fully in effect, this is the reality of running Windows 11 with a dedicated GPU. Windows 11 has had a driver problem since day one. A deliberate design that prioritized OEM catalog entries over user choice, operated without transparency, and persisted without correction for 5 years. The fix Microsoft announced in May 2026 is real, and it is the right call. A more precise targeting model that respects what users have chosen to install is what should have existed from the start. But the fact that it took until 2026 to acknowledge the problem publicly, and until early 2027 for the fix to reach existing hardware owners, tells you something about where ordinary users sit in Microsoft's list of priorities. Check your GPU driver version today. Open your control panel, compare it to what NVIDIA, AMD, or Intel currently offers, and find out whether Windows has quietly been running your hardware below its capability. A lot of people are going to discover the answer is yes.